Unit 5, getting bookings. So in this unit, we're going to talk about the different ways to get bookings. So when I started 10 years ago, I used Google Ads as my first marketing route to promote my brand. As I spoke about before in previous units, I had 60 pictures, and these were previous weddings, shot on film, which I made into scans to show online. And I then used a budget. I said to myself, I'm going to use a £350 budget. And when that runs out, that runs out. And I'm going to try and retain bookings simply this way. Some might argue that the market now is so saturated, that's quite complicated, and you need 3 times that budget. But I'm just saying what I did at this point. After 3 months, I had about 7 bookings. And some of them were quite last-minute weddings. I started the process in the early summer of 2008, and by the end of that summer, I'd already shot 4 weddings. And the following year, I had another 9 weddings, and that came from running this process. So I kind of felt, though, that I was throwing money away into this kind of abyss, that there was something quite random, and there was this sort of feel as well, that there was these stories of rival photographers clicking your website ads, which would then ruin your money, your investment, and so on. And I thought that actually sounds like a reasonable point, that people might do that. And I lost some faith in it. And I decided to shift from this approach and then invest money in wedding fairs. So in my second year of running, I did a wedding fair. And this changed everything, in my view. So I was around the £1,500 mark for 2 shooters. Back then, it was like a CD. We call it CD shoots, file shoots, and so on. I was charging around £1,500 for a full day CD only. I did a wedding fair, and the thing about a wedding fair is you get 2 days normally, talking about these national shows. In the UK, there's different companies that do them. And back then I did 2 shows quite close to each other. One was at Olympia in London, the other one was Excel in London. And they're quite broad, mainstream shows. And in those shows, you're looking maybe 100 or 200 stands, and maybe 10% photographers, maybe 10 or 8 photographers. And because I'd come out of a teaching background and an artistic background, I felt 10 years ago, I was very clear about how I wanted to show my work, and I showed it as an art gallery. So I wanted a clean space. I was one of the first at the time to say I wanted a wood cladding walls. I remember the organisers like, well, we haven't never done that before. We need to charge you for NDF, and it's not on the price list. So they kind of made up this price for me, and then made these wooden boards that I then had painted, and I couldn't paint them myself. So they had to then charge me another cost to paint them. So I wanted these white, clean walls. And as you can see from the examples that we're seeing now, that I did hang my work in a gallery-like structure, and then create this kind of seating area. And my first fair, I came in at this price of about $1,500, and I had 18 weddings from 2 days. And although the fair cost me $3,000, and then the investment in the extras probably about another $1,500, the furniture and so on. So I probably spent $5,000, but I then got 18 bookings at $1,500, and they were all around the country. And from that investment, then I invested in equipment and in a studio space, and I invested in staff. So I had my first time full-time employee to help me, who was my second shooter. Then I continued with the wedding fair approach. So I dropped the Google ads, and I worked to some extent on SEOs. And SEOs is, again, something very important, which I don't so much do now. I'm less interested in SEOs for myself, but I think when you're starting out, I think it's very, very important, and there's some experts in the field that can help you with SEOs. And you'll see some links to some fantastic experts on SEOs, and they will guide you and help you refine your optimization. With the wedding fairs, I continued for the next 2 to 3 years and bringing my price up. And as I said before, I was changing my books, changing the pictures in the frames, changing the whole feel, and changing the prices, and trying to target a new couple in a new context. So if I knew I wanted to move towards more London shoots, towards more hotel shoots, and so on. So although my aesthetic and my tradition, my approach remained the same, I wanted my work to reflect the direction I wished to go in. So I was concentrating on showing more ballrooms, more hotels, more luxury venues in my books and on my displays. But I also, at the same time, was interested in religion, in religious weddings. So I wanted my books. There's one point I said I need a Jewish book, I need an Asian book, and I need a Greek book. And this is a big market in London, and this is something I was targeting. And I still have those books, updated books, that I show. So if I have a meeting with a Jewish couple, I bring my Jewish books. That makes sense, doesn't it? And it's the same with all sorts of different religious. I've got those books to reflect it. And that means I've got lots of books, and it's true, I do have lots of books. And as I said, I keep updating my books. And I think you do need that to be able to focus. And many weddings you do will not go to the portfolio, will not go to your website, will not go in postcards or print and so on. And that's not because of NDAs, that's just because you got to the point where you're shooting where you want to shoot, and you don't need to add it in. It doesn't add anything by adding anything in, unless they're just outstanding work that you need to add. So maybe after a while, your portfolio, my portfolio, stayed quite consistent the last few years. It looks a certain way. I try and add maybe 10 or 15 every year, but they have to be really great because I want it tight, want my portfolio tight. We talked about SEO, we've talked about Google Ads, and we've talked about fairs. And the thing about fairs is there reaches a point, if you're in a certain type of fair and you're pushing yourself higher and higher, that you have to leave the fair behind you, because the audience in the fair don't reflect where you're at. And even if the fair people are saying, well, we'd love to have you back and so on, you kind of reach a point where you should reach a point where this is not working. And the numbers are there to do the math. If it doesn't work and you're not getting the conversions at the fair that you need, or you're just breaking even, then it's not working like it used to. And you don't want to go back to the price before. So you want to just keep pushing and pushing. So then you might consider different types of fairs. So there might be ateliers and more kind of luxury fairs that you might want to push towards. And those things are useful. And they're useful for lots of ways. They're useful for alignments, for relationships, for networking with venues and with planners that go to those fairs. So when you start doing luxury fairs, you start to meet luxury planners and work with luxury venues. So don't discount luxury wedding fairs. And there's many fantastic ones, particularly in the UK, and I'm sure around the world, that are worth investing in. And sometimes actually the hard part's getting in with them, because they're so exclusive and they're dealing with a luxury market. Then the challenge is to be recognized by the organizers to get in it. But you just keep trying, you keep pushing your work, and you're showing what you're doing. So then in the end, it's a simple alignment. It just slips in. So an area of bookings that's important to my brand right now that actually was much harder at the beginning is recommendations from venues and recommendations from planners. So that does take time. That's just the way it is. You can't just appear out of nowhere in a vacuum and expect venues and planners to recommend you. That takes time in terms of reliability, in terms of production, in terms of work, in terms of quality, in terms of testimonies, in terms of awards, in terms of name, reputation, and this takes time. So that the luxury planners represent you because you're representing them as well, and they know you're going to do the right job, and that does take time. But I get lots of weddings from planners and from venues. I'm aligned with lots of venues. And like I've said in another unit, then there's issues to do with perhaps commissions or not. This is something that happens in a sense of randomly. Different planners and different venues have different arrangements. You deal with those case to case. So for me, this is a big area of my business and how I get bookings. Another area is recommendations itself from couples. So this just again evolves over time, and this is one of the most valuable ways to get bookings, which is to do such a great job in all sorts of ways. So I think this is about care. So it's not just about shooting the wedding and delivering the files, it's about aftercare. It's about shooting the wedding and delivering the files on time and doing a great job, not letting them drop off and delay things. The whole service from the start to the pre, to the shoot, to the delivery is a beautiful service all the way. And you maybe even think about ongoing relationships. Like I will shoot christenings sometimes as gifts to couples. If I've done a big wedding for a couple and a year later they ask me to do the christening shoot and it's 2 hours and it's on a Sunday or a Saturday and I'm quiet, often I'll do that for free as a gift. And these relationships then become long term. So there's one family I've had who are actually on the Forbes list. I've shot 13 events for them and one of them was a wedding, and John Legend played at the weddings. He was the artist that played on the wedding. And I've continued having that relationship with that family and working with them ongoing. So I think be aware that long-term relationships are the best relationships, because they lead to not just repeat bookings with the clients and other events and parties and so on, but their friends who will recommend you to their sisters and brothers and cousins and so on, and guests, so that you are part of that collective, and the work you're getting back actually reflects the collective. So when you get to where you want to go, actually it just self-evolves, because you're at the level you want to be at, and you're not necessarily trying to push beyond, because you've reached your ideal client, and then the work just spreads because you're connecting in that circle and in that area. So it's got to the point in my career where it's self-evolving. So I've reached the point which I want to reach, and the recommendations that I receive, not just from the venues and the planners, but also the couples, all reflect the area I want to work in. But how do you get there in the first place? As I've been discussing all through the themes of these units on this course, it's about aligning yourself with a certain approach, which is consistent and clear, being professional, updating your work, networking, relationships that take time to evolve, and you see a long-term view at it, thinking about clients not just as a one-time thing, but thinking about clients as a future relationship and a future investment. And even if in the early days they're not your ideal client, you still should consider that in the same way, with the same passion, the same enthusiasm, and it will build from there. While they might not be your ideal client, that future investment with them can lead to other clients that might more link to where you want to get to. But also it's an example of best practice, that you treat, there's this phrase, this expression, you're only as good as your last job. And I've lived my life by it. You give everything to every shoot, as whether it's £1,000 shoot or a £20,000 shoot. And I think that's something that you need to push into your practice and maintain into your practice. Everything's interconnected. And there's a whole set of causalities, that one thing leads to another, and be open to these things, and to be constantly generous in the way you work and the way you relate to people.